everyone doing? This is going to be our first online class. We've got a little sort of like a PowerPoint for you, and then we'll have a question and answer session. Feel free to ask any questions that you have, and I'm just fixing some technical stuff here. Make sure my volume is all right. If you guys have any problems, let me know. Katie's going to be here any second. In fact, I'm going to pour some wine for us because that's how we do stuff at Spadefoot. We do it with wine and beer. This class is going to be specifically about growing vegetables and herbs in Baja, Arizona. That's lower Arizona. Of course, our expertise is growing them in Tucson, but we have some experience growing them in the higher elevations too, and so there might be some specific questions that I got you some wine. And organically, with an emphasis on doing it all wildlife friendly. And Katie's just got back from picking up our car. We're live. So Katie's going to be monitoring your questions, and isn't it exciting? The other questions will be right there.
I see that.
Yeah, and anytime this shows up, you can just exit out. But it'll let you know what the connection's like. So anyways, hi guys, how's it going? I hope you're enjoying the rain. We are definitely enjoying the rain. And finally got a little bit of rain. I guess we should get this class started. So let's do that. I'm going to set it up over here. Again, this is growing vegetables and herbs. Oh, wait, hold on a second. I do want to go over some of our future classes we'll be having because people have been asking. So the classes that are coming up, we're going to have on July 30th. We're going to be doing this every Thursday, which is probably crazy because whatever. But every Thursday, we're going to have a class, and then afterwards, question and answer session. And it's also your chance to ask questions that you might have about anything regarding gardening or landscaping or wildscaping, whatever we're appropriate people to ask questions of. So the next class is going to be on establishing new plants and basic plant care. That's for not just new people, but we actually kind of go into some depth on what plants need. August 6th, Thursday, we're going to do a class called Digging Deep. That's compost, plant nutrition, and soil biology. That's where we really dig in and get into the nitty gritty of like why you do what you do when you garden. That's one of our more popular classes too. Plus you get to learn how to compost and make compost tea, and why we're doing that. Like, what are you doing when you add compost? Like, what's the purpose of doing that? We'll go over a little bit of that in this class, but in depth in that one. August 13th will be native food plants of Baja, Arizona. We'll talk about not only the history of use of plants, food plants, but also contemporary use of plant foods and also, we'll talk about the future a little bit too, because we are living in a drying climate. August 20th will be container gardening, and that's for people who don't necessarily have a yard, or let's say you're like us and you ran out of space. You might be adding stuff into containers because that's what we're doing. We're out of space. August 27th is called Right Plant, Right Place, Planning the Landscape. That's about what it says. But one of the biggest mistakes we've noticed people make is planting in such a way that it looks good right now and then forgetting that the plant grows. But we go into a lot more than that. It's a really good class. September 3rd will be Wildscaping in Baja, Arizona. That's growing for the bugs and the birds and the non-human residents of Baja, Arizona. September 10th is for the love of weird plants, growing cacti and succulents. That's for us who like the weirdos. And then finally, September 7th, we'll do a class on growing fruit trees, fruit shrubs, and fruit vines. The bigger fruit, mostly fruit trees, but there's also, like kiwi vines or, shrubs that are edible too. So that's a little bit different than what we're going over today. Today's vegetables and herbs. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's get on to the class. And hello to everybody. Thanks for joining in. And then as far as the donation, we have a suggested donation for $15. You don't have to pay it if you don't have the money. But if you do have the money, throw some money our way. That'll keep us doing this. So let's start it off. First of all, the history, and sorry about the capital H in there.
Should be the herstory.
The herstory. Yes. This is actually a picture of me when I worked for Andrew Weil. I grew tomatoes for him. I grew a lot of stuff for him. But for me personally, I got into food gardening because of tomatoes. And I thought, I was growing all these rare plants. Plants that are not edible, just nerd plants, orchids and cacti and very difficult plants to grow. And then one day I was like, I should try to grow some tomatoes. I'd probably be pretty good at it. And I did a good job. What came about is that I got all these fruits, and then I wasn't much of a food guy. So let me just rewind back. I was a plant guy as a kid in my 20s, in the 90s, and I didn't really have a food history, really. I mean, I wasn't much of a foodie. I am now. But that all started with the tomato, and it's because I grew a bunch of them, and then I had this anxiety. I didn't want to, waste them. I spent this time growing these beautiful tomatoes. I grew, several different heirloom varieties of tomatoes, and so I didn't want to waste them. So I started doing things like, of course I made salsa, but salsa only lasts so long. So I started learning how to can, and I was preserving, tomato sauce and making various tomato canned ingredients, tomato paste, tomato whole canned tomatoes, all the things you usually do when you store tomatoes. I sun-dried them, and this was an excellent way to save them, because they also create a different product out of this one fruit. So you're not, it's not just this one use and one flavor. When you sun-dry them, you get this completely different flavor, and that's something that they know in Mexican cuisine. You go deep into Mexico, and they use a lot of sun-dried vegetables, not just tomatoes, but all kinds of vegetables, and then of course they store well too, so that was also pretty handy. And I just started exploring recipes and using them at different stages. That's when I started eating green tomatoes, fried green tomatoes, something that Katie is a lot more good at making than I am, and also obsessed about.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
It's not that hard. And of course, I started growing weirder and weirder varieties. And I say weird, I just mean, they're not the stuff that you necessarily will find in the grocery store. And that got me excited too, because I realized not only do you get tomatoes, but you get to have tomatoes that no one else has. When you go to the grocery store, there's maybe 5 varieties of tomatoes if you're lucky, usually 2 or 3. But if you grow tomatoes, you have literally hundreds and hundreds of varieties to choose from, and they all have their purposes. And sometimes the fun of growing these things is learning how to use that variety. So it was exciting for me. This is the garden, one part of the garden that I did for Andrew Weil. If you know him, he's a famous doctor with the big beard. Anyway, I used to grow his food and write for his webpage and stuff. But tomatoes was a big thing that we did, amongst other things. The thing that started to happen to me though is I became a food grower. I really, aside from my botany side in my interest in ecology and botany and unusual plants, I got into food, and more I was becoming a foodie and a drunk, and so and I say that in a good way. But I was loving food, and I was learning more about the food that I was eating, which is something that I think everyone should do because we all depend on food. We should be knowledgeable about where it comes from and how it's grown, and and makes you a better consumer. Um, I went through some periods in my life after this where I was poor and I didn't have a lot of money. I literally, in this picture, I was living in Barrio Anita many years ago, and I actually sometimes had my bills turned off. I was so poor, but I had to grow. I was growing food again because I had to. But of course, I still grew the weird stuff. Um, and then around the time I met this one, started a magazine. You may have heard of this magazine. It's now defunct, but got into food so much that I started a magazine on food. So the obsession's been, a winding road. When Katie and I first got together to get the magazine going, we lived in an apartment, and so we didn't have a place to grow plants. So this is actually a picture of us in a community garden. So we took advantage of that. So you don't necessarily have to have a big yard to grow vegetables in. You can find a community garden space. You can also grow them in containers. We didn't have the room in our place at that time.
Didn't have a patio.
But we were growing stuff, and both of us becoming obsessed with making food, and growing more and more unusual stuff. So, and then there was always the challenge of what to do with it too. These are really cool peppers from India, Redska, I think it's called, or something like that. And that's what we made it into, is that tomato. Pepper. What do you call that?
It's like a
It's
salsa.
It's
a sauce, like a hot sauce,
like a Tabasco almost. Yeah, like a hot sauce. And that was delicious too. And we've made it out of the hottest peppers, as well as not so hot peppers. So then we got to this place, and the place that we're in now, that we're actually broadcasting from, we call it Rancho Gadito. This is the what we started with. There was actually a concrete slab in the middle that we had to break up. There's a lot of work to do, but this is before, and this is like about a year later. That's the same place. So
and that's a summer garden.
That's summer garden, right? And you can see this is summer. You can see the look on my face. The sun just doesn't leave you alone. It's just like, oh, I'm gonna get you. So anyway, this is what we did, and this was our summer garden. But the other thing to note about this, a lot of people have had the experience of, you're growing tomatoes and they just stop fruiting in the middle of the summer, and that's not unusual, even if you're doing everything right. But if you do sunken beds, and if you mulch your garden, and you feed the plants, and they're healthy and they're well watered, evenly watered, you can have tomatoes in the middle of summer. And we did. This summer we had so many tomatoes that we didn't know what to do with them all. It was, actually some of those previous pictures of the sun drying and sauce making came from this period, because we just had so much. And not just, we had squash and so many vegetables. So you can grow a lot out of a little bit of space. You can actually feed yourself. And we do pretty much, feed ourselves out of our garden. This year, because we started the Nursery retail location, we have, we've had less time to work on the garden, so it hasn't been as productive this year because it's been an afterthought. But my oldest child just moved in, and will be here going to college, and they are going to be working on the garden with us. So I suspect our fall into winter garden is going to be very productive. But anyway, this is a typical haul from our garden. Just like whenever we go out there, we'll pick some stuff, zucchinis. And this is the obviously summer or warm season. I refer to the whole warm season because it includes summer, but it also includes, spring and fall. And there's crossover between the cool season and the warm season. We'll go into that. We also we have to get creative all the time. We don't have to get creative. We do because it's fun. So we come up with different items that we've made. This is nasturtium green pods. So after they flower, they make a little fruit, and you pick them green and you pickle them, and it's basically like a caper. That was fun, and that was found from an old recipe in Joy of Cooking, in one of the old Joys of Cooking, where they still did a lot of garden related stuff. They don't have that in the new one, but that was a fun project. We got into chickens too, and Katie and I have raised almost every single kind of chicken that's been available in Tucson anyways over the years. The first time that I got chickens, I actually didn't even think about, there's eggs and there's, even meat if you eat meat. I got them because of their poop, and that's why we have them, to get their poop, and we compost that. And we got into other things too. We have bees, several colonies of bees, and that's been fun. This is me and the kids. We took them into the hive, and this, by the way, also became the cover of our album, our rap album, the McKinley 3, Ain't Nobody's Business. But we raise honey too, and I'm actually, to be honest, I'm a little bit more obsessed with the native bees these days, but I still like getting the honey, and if the world keeps going the direction it's going in, I think I'm going to want to have my own beehives so that we have our own sweetener. But I've raised goats before. We don't have goats at the moment because we don't have the time to be milking them twice a day, right? Mm-mm. Not yet. I'm trying to talk her into it.
I grew up with goats. I know the responsibility.
Also excellent source of manure. So it all depends on your space. We try to, we've experimented with all kinds of stuff. We have ducks now. This is actually our geese that we raised, and sorry vegetarians, but we ate them. But we've tried all kinds of things, and we even have these giant rescue tortoises. These are sulcatas. There's 2 of them. Giant tortoises that they just needed a home, and we say why not. Also good manure. So but it all goes back to food and what we're gonna do with it, and we've played around with so many different types of pickling and drying and all kinds of stuff. So let's get into the seasons, because for some of you who are new to gardening, vegetable and herb gardening in Baja, Arizona, which is, by the way, for those of you who are new, Baja, Arizona is lower Arizona. It's the Gadsden Purchase part of Arizona, and culturally, it's very different than the rest of Arizona. Where we're here because of the border, not despite the border. And we have a very heavily Mexican influenced culture in our food and relationships. So Baja, Arizona is the area we're talking about. So southern Arizona, which is a combination of low desert, grassland, and of course we have the mountains that surround us in Tucson, and then that are speckled across the landscape. It's part of the reason why the landscape, we have one of the highest of number of species of plants in the country. The diversity is very high here, despite being a desert, or some of us say because of the desert, or partly because of the desert. We have a high number of species. Same with birds. Baja, Arizona is a hot spot for birders. Birders come here from all over the world just to see certain birds. So anyways, we're going to talk about the seasons in our region. And so there are a few different seasons. There's really two, the cool season and the warm season when it comes to gardening. What we call the balmy season is sort of in two spots, the spring and the fall. There's that season that's sort of a cross season. It's when you're, let's say the spring, you're winding down on the cool season crops, but you're starting to add in the warm season crops. It's not a line. It's like a fade. And all of our crops sort of fit in there somewhere, and they're not all going to end at the same time, and they're not all going to start at the same time. But there's also some crops that is their season. There's plants that we grow that we'll talk about that you grow them in the balmy season, and that's when they produce the best. Sometimes they can snake in and out of the warm or cool season, but the balmy season's when they really like to be around. And then we'll talk about some perennial crops too, like your herbs, like thyme and oregano and mint. Those are perennial crops. They're around all the time. They may go dormant at certain times of the year, but when you put them in the ground, it's a permanent spot. It's not something you sow every year. So most of the crops that are vegetables and herbs that we talk about are annual crops. We grow them for a season, and then they either bolt or they freeze depending on the crop, or you harvest it all. And so the annual crops and the perennial crops. So perennial crops are going to be year round. So the other thing, everything I tell you, don't be afraid to play around and break the rules. And I always talk about radishes with this because I have a friend who started a garden many years ago, and he was like, I planted radishes, and I was like, I didn't want to rain on his parade, but he planted them in June, or maybe no, it was July. He planted them in July, and I was like, oh, that's a winter crop, and so like I expected he would have failure, but his garden was kind of shady, and he did a good job on the soil, and he had radishes in August. So, the rules are made to be broken. Nature or tested. Yeah, nature doesn't play an even keel game. Nature doesn't do the same thing all the time. So don't be afraid to break the rules. Also, I don't have a slide for this, but expect failure. And don't just expect failure, cherish failure, because you are going to fail, and everyone does. I kill plants. Katie kills plants. We all kill plants. The more you grow stuff, the more you kill. And it's natural. It's normal because you're playing with nature. It's not predictable. In nature, things die too. So don't let that dismay you. If you have a plant and you grew it and it just failed, don't let that drag you down.
Well, and try and sort of notice what
you did wrong.
If you don't know what you did wrong, but try and take note of what you did and maybe what could have gone wrong.
Right. You won't always know.
Yeah. Sometimes plants just die. It just happens.
Yeah. So I love telling people that because I want you to know that master gardener that just brags about what they're doing, and I'm not picking on master gardeners because they're great people, but there's that dude who's acts like they don't ever kill anything. Liar is a liar. Okay, so everybody kills stuff, everybody fails. Learn from it. That's an important job in being a gardener. Accept your failure and learn from it. So let's start off and try again. And try the same thing sometimes again, because sometimes you think, oh, I did this thing wrong, and that's not what happened. It was just some random, Anyway, so let's talk about the cool season crops. We're coming on that season. A lot of the crops that are part of the cool season are going to be started in coming up here. As early as August, some of these crops can be sown from seed. Um, and and this isn't something you just plant all at once either. You're planting them here and there, and you're making successions too. You're going to plant a flush of greens, and then you're going to eat those greens, and you're going to plant another flush if you like them, or maybe you'll try something different. But you're going to be planting throughout the whole cool season. It's not just one time you plant stuff and then you just reap the benefits the whole time. It doesn't work like that way. But a lot of people picture it that way. Part of it's the fault of the nurseries, because nurseries really push this whole fall is the best time to plant, and they want you to buy everything at once and you plant it all because you think fall is the best time. It's just a marketing tool because summer is really tough and nurseries need to make money, so they push people in by saying, oh, fall gardening. There's some truth to fall gardening and fall planting, but in general, you're going to be planting throughout the whole cool season. The cool season crops tend to be more frost hardy, and and they don't stop germinating because the winter comes. They keep germinating. They might germinate slower, but they keep growing. So you have the greens. The greens are going to be, everything from lettuce. Collards, kale. The picture on there is radicchio, chard, right? The greens are these, mostly mustards, and they you eat the leaves. You can do them in a couple different ways. Some people will plant them really close together, and harvest them really small. Or sometimes people want to grow that beautiful head of lettuce or that beautiful head of radicchio, like in the picture. In that case, you want to sow your seed and then thin it out and give each seedling enough room to grow. And we're going to talk a little bit how to do that later, but right now I'm talking about season. The greens are some of my favorite things to grow, actually, because it's so satisfying. The other things you're going to be growing in the cool season, the cole crops. Cole crops are basically, there's some crossover. There's actually some cole crops that are greens, but cole crops are plants in the genus Brassica, and it includes cauliflower and broccoli and Romanesco and those sorts of things. And the cole crops, when we talk about cole crops, we're talking about eating the flower buds. That picture there is of broccoli, and that part that you harvest, I don't know how many people know this, but that's a flower bud. If you let it go, it turns into little yellow flowers. All those little buds turn into little yellow flowers. So you eat the flower bud on these cole crops, on broccoli and cauliflower and Romanesco. That's another winter crop. Then there's a lot of the root crops. There's radishes and turnips and beets. That picture there is burdock, which actually has kind of a weird season, but you can have it ready to harvest by the end of the spring. You're growing it through the winter and summer, actually, sometimes. But the root crops are mostly your radishes, turnips, beets. There's carrots, all those root crops that you typically find in the grocery store. And we're not talking about potatoes. We'll talk about that later. Potatoes and sweet potatoes are a root crop, but they're of a more perennial type plant. The cool season root crops tend to be annuals, especially in our environment. So oddly enough, that burdock is a perennial plant. But anyway, root crops. The cool season herbs, and that's a lot of these annual herbs, with the exception of basil, are cool season herbs. So cilantro, parsley. The picture on the screen there is chervil, which is a favorite of mine. Lovage, dill. Those are all your cool season herbs, and it's a lot of our. If the herb's an annual, it's most likely a cool season herb. unless it's, again, basil. There's probably some other exceptions that I'm not thinking about at the moment, but most of them are cool season. And then the legumes, most legumes are actually warm season, but fava beans and garbanzo beans, those are cool season legumes. They actually grow in the cool weather, and that's because they come from a place in the Mediterranean where they get all their moisture in the wintertime. So that's their season that they evolved with. So there's only a few of those, but they exist. I just want you to know that. The alliums, and the alliums are the onions, garlic, that family. Those are also cool season as well. You're going to plant them in the fall mostly and grow them through the cool season. They actually kind of grow in the fall, and then they might even get frozen a little bit, the tops, in the wintertime, and then they grow again in the spring. Sometimes they don't freeze at all. It depends on where you live. But the alliums are considered a cool season crop. You harvest them late spring or even into the early summer. Sometimes your onions are still are growing into summer, but the main season's the cool season for them. And so that's most of the common cool season crops. The thing I really like about the cool season crops is that they're really easy to grow. They're tidy. They make, you can plan about how big it's going to get, as opposed to the worm season, which we'll talk about, is more of a mess. But the cool season crops are tidier. They're easier to plan because of how big they're going to get. They take up less room. You can grow a lot of food in a little bit of space with the cool season crops, and that's because you eat the whole thing, right? So like eggplants, tomatoes, peppers, those are warm season crops. You don't eat the whole plant. You only eat the fruit. But most of the cool season crops, you eat the whole plant. You eat the whole top.
Is Itoy onion a cool?
Yes. So if you have now, okay, I'm glad someone asked that question. Let's go back to the alliums. The Itoy onions is a type of onion that we call a multiplier, and so
or a
bunching onion. So it's perennial, and it grows very different than the onions in this picture, which are bulbing onions. Bulbing onions you plant once, and you plant them in the fall, and you let them grow and grow and grow and grow until late spring, early summer, when the tops start to die down. You yank them up and you dry them out a little bit, and you have your bulb onion. That's how you grow an onion usually. But we have other types of onions, like they call them multiplier onions, or there's other names for them. But the Itoy onion is a multiplier onion, which means it's always kind of growing. Now they do kind of go dormant a little bit in the summertime sometimes, depending on how happy they are. Sometimes they will keep going, but you'll see brown in the summertime, and you don't ever get too worried about that. If your Itoys are a little brown in the summer, they should be totally dormant. So they keep growing, and the way you harvest them is you get in there and you pull a few out and put them back in there, but they keep producing more and more and more. They keep growing and spreading out. Same with Rockio onions, which is the Japanese version of the Itoy onion. There's several multiplier type onions. So those are kind of, it's almost like it's not a it's a permanent spot in the garden because they're going to keep growing, and you're going to continually harvest them as you use them, unless you're going to do some kind of crazy onion relish or something, and you're going to dig them all up and use them all. But
you could even just pull one off and stick it back.
Right? Yeah, you can pull them out. You can pull up a clump, pull out the ones you want, and then replant those other ones. And that's actually a good thing to do sometimes, to divide them up a little bit so it gives them room to grow. So I'm glad someone asked that question, because in everything that we talk about, there's always exceptions like that. And that Itoy onion is amazing. It's a fantastic crop. It's a Tohono O'odham crop, and Native Seed Search has been making it available for years, and we're big fans of that. So yeah, and frost is a thing that's going to be happening in the garden too. In this picture, you can see how the leaves are covered in frost, and there are some of the winter crops that some of the leaves may get damaged, um, but they come out of it pretty all right, and most of the time there are some very tender lettuces that really don't want to be frozen too much, but actually frost makes kale and cabbage taste better, so they have no issue with the frost. um, so but an important element in cool season gardening, and something to plan around is frost. And like I said, most of your crops you're not going to have to worry too much about the frost if it's a cool season crop. And the damage that you do get is mostly cosmetic. The new growth will come out if some of the outer leaves get a little black looking. That happens. They usually grow out of that just fine. Now I am talking mostly about Tucson. If you're in southern Arizona and the grasslands or even higher up, your frost is way more serious, and there are some like lettuces and stuff that will just croak. So if you're out there,
and the seasons are a little bit off compared
yep.
to ours.
Yeah, your cool season lasts a lot longer. You have to wait a lot longer before you plant your warm season stuff. So qualifier there. Many of your cool season crops are pioneer plants. So what does that mean? Pioneer plants are weeds. They're plants that don't need a heck of a lot of nutrition. If you're just getting into gardening, the cool season garden is a confidence builder, because you can put just a little bit of work into the soil and you'll have really good results. Summer gardening is a lot harder because those crops tend to be a little bit more nutrient demanding, and they want more biology in the soil. And if you're just getting started, the cool season is a confidence builder. Because they're weeds, and weeds, pop up in places where there's not a lot of competition because the soil sucks. That's how they evolve. They're like, oh, it's too hard over here in the old growth forest. I'm going to go out to this like disturbed field, and that's where they found their ecological niche. So that's a lot of the cool season plants. But particularly the leafy stuff and the root crops, the cole crops, those are all plants that have been selected from weedy pioneer plants. It means also a lot less work in terms of feeding. And also the cool season, you'll feed sometimes in the cool season, and it makes a huge difference if you do. If you don't, it's not as big a deal. But feed your plants. It's nice to feed your plants, and feed them organic always. And we'll go into why later.
Do you want to address this now? Or
how useful is greenhouse growing? Greenhouse growing in Tucson is definitely something that people do. So someone asked how useful is greenhouse growing in Tucson? It is useful. We live in a climate where we can grow year round, but you can extend your seasons with a greenhouse. Also, or even just a miniature little like having a cold frame is great, or a greenhouse where you can protect those seedlings and get them started, and then plant them as soon as the frost is gone, and you have a little bit of a head start. So it's very, very helpful. Bolting is another issue for the cool season crops because they are mostly annuals. In nature, they're annuals as well as in the garden situation. And what that means is at the end of their life, they put a lot of energy into flowering and seed production. So in a warm climate like ours, some of our crops will bolt prematurely, like this cilantro plant in the picture. other things will cause that too. I've noticed actually that when you buy cilantro in a container and plant it, and then you direct seed some cilantro right next to it, the direct seeded cilantro will live longer and will bolt later than the planted one from a pot. And I don't know why that is. Maybe because when it's a seedling, it's been warmer. Not sure, or it roots deeper if it directly germinated in that ground. But anyway, bolting is something, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. In China and in Asia in general, they have a use for a plant in all of its stages. Like there's recipes for how to use mustard flowers and mustard seeds. Of course, the whole world used to be like that. We used to, when we all grew our crops, we didn't waste anything. We used to make use of everything. So there is a use for mustard seed. Duh, that's what mustard is. You use mustard, comes from mustard seed. And the mustard seeds that you use in Indian food when you like infuse the oil, that's a mustard seed. It's a seed. Cilantro seed is coriander. So coriander is the seed of the cilantro. So some people want the bolting to happen because that's the goal. And that's something you can pickle, by the way. Green cilantro seeds can be pickled and they're delicious.
And that might be a good use for growing cilantro out of season.
Right.
It'll bolt faster, but you do get cilantro feels like it should be a summer crop, but it's not.
Especially
here.
Yeah, here.
So, but you could do a slow bolt selection, and then once it bolts, just collect the seed and either pickle them or save them. So you have coriander seed, which is a really amazing spice for Indian food, a lot of different foods.
Yeah, and Europeans, of course, use a lot of coriander as well. It's not just Asian, but the Asians make a better use of it than we tend to do. And by the way, as an aside, really study cookbooks and study cookbooks from other countries, particularly the Chinese. Like we read a lot of Chinese food books because the Chinese are so good at turning plants into food and making something really delicious out of we're going to go into something a little later that'll highlight that point, but study cookbooks. Gardening, vegetables and herbs is all about becoming a foodie. It's all about becoming obsessed with food and having a stronger connection to food and making you a better cook. So anyway, bolting. And, another use of flowers, by the way, is, people infuse them into vinegars. So like if you want to make a vinegar that you'll later use as a salad dressing or something like that, that's what I do with my cilantro flowers, actually. So, and onion flowers, actually. Keep playing. And you'll notice that some of your greens will keep on living. One of the things that we always get asked in the late spring, early summer is like, oh my God, my Swiss chard looks terrible. There's aphids on it and whatever. And I'm always like, that's because it's out of season. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do in the summer. And sometimes your Swiss chard will keep on going and it'll green up again in the fall. So that happens all the time. So just be aware of that, but don't freak out if you see your Swiss chard looking like this picture in late spring, early summer. That's just about the time it's supposed to do that. And sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll look fantastic. I've seen Swiss chard look really good in the summer too. So there's that.
Not always a reason to keep the plant either.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to power through summer and I will let this chard live or this tomato will make it through winter. Some people are very proud of their plant that survived.
That they worked very hard on. Yeah.
But they don't always, especially fruiting plants don't always produce as well the next season.
Don't be afraid.
Don't be
afraid. Don't be afraid to rip it out. If a plant's been taking up space and it's not doing anything for you, and you really have some other things to plant,
compost it.
Rip it out, compost it, or give it to the chickens or something. But don't waste your time. Unless you really want to power through and then not plant that Swiss chard again. And
God bless.
God bless. All right, so on to the warm season. The warm season. Oh, by the way, the cool season. By the way, it starts in August and it's going to go all through the winter, and it goes all the way to almost summer, depending on the crop. Like some of the crops will jump out sooner than others. Like your, sort of sensitive bok choys and stuff like that. As soon as that warm spring comes, they just start bolting and they're gone. Whereas like your Swiss chard, for example, will probably keep going. So then the summer comes, but before the summer is the warm season. And the warm season, you really start thinking about the warm season during Christmas, and that's the time where if you want to grow some of these like crops that take a long time, like if you want to grow Tahitian squash, which I really recommend if you have the time and space and the energy to do it. Tahitian squash will change your mind about squash. If you don't like squash, grow a Tahitian squash. It's the most delicious thing ever. It's a giant squash, but it takes a long time. So you start the seed December inside, in a window, or if you have a little greenhouse or a little frame that protects everything from the frost, or a grow light. A lot of people do that too. Then you can get started on some of those early crops so that you can get as much out of it as possible, so that you get a whole bunch of Tahitian fruits before the frost hits. So really start thinking about the warm season in February, or in December. But even sooner than that, that's when you hit the catalogs. There's a wonderful book called I just lost the name of it.
Which book?
Onward and Upward in the Garden.
Oh.
And it's a woman who wrote a whole series of stuff in the New Yorker, and it was her literary criticisms of seed catalogs, because she lived in a cold climate where half the year she was like dreaming about what she was going to grow. Dream about what you're going to grow, like before the season hits, even though you have, like, we live in Tucson, so we can grow year round, but I get excited about the next season. I start reading what's available in all those catalogs beforehand. So, and you start getting towards the holiday season, start thinking about how you're going to reward yourself. Like, what do I want for the holidays?
And we've been asked by someone for a list of companies that we utilize, like seed companies that we really enjoy. So we'll make a list. And post it in the comments, and probably put it on the website too. And we'll sort of specify like what they're good for, and yeah. So we'll create that.
The short answer to that question is several catalogs for several different things, because there's some catalogs that are really good on Italian heirloom varieties, and others that are good on Asian varieties or whatever. So we'll make a list.
Do you remember the author of that book?
Yeah, of course I do. She was married to E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web.
Yeah.
Catherine S. White. There it is.
Boom.
Onward and Upward in the Garden by Catherine S. White.
See if it's in your library. Maybe it's at the library.
Yeah, maybe it's at the library. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. If you're a gardener and you love plants, it's a fantastic book. But anyway, so and growing stuff from seed is the best way to go if you can do it. And I know that like I'm making us less money by saying that, because we make a lot of money we don't make that much money, but we make some money selling starters that are pretty easy to start on your own, because people are intimidated by it. But we want you to be gardeners, so learn how to grow things from seed. It's very important.
And it's fun. And
we'll talk about some pointers for that soon. But let's finish out these seasons. So the warm season crops, tomatoes is obviously one of them. So the nightshades are plants in the Solanaceae, and the Solanaceae is the nightshade family. It's potatoes, tomatoes, poisonous plants, lots of poisonous plants. In fact, some of our most edible crops were poisonous before they were edible, like the tomato, like eggplants. So the tomatoes, obviously. Eggplants. And if you think you don't like eggplants, by the way, try these Asian varieties. Slice them in half and roast them in the oven. It's like eating candy. It's a totally different experience than eating the mushy, giant, typical eggplant that's sold in the grocery stores. So eggplants, there's so many of them. There's so many different flavors and varieties of them that we never ever see in the grocery store. They literally only have like one type of eggplant in the grocery store, so that's a fun world to explore. Peppers, endless varieties. Again, you only get maybe 5 varieties in the grocery store. In the picture, there is a balloon pepper, which is even a totally different species. It's not Capsicum annuum. It's, I think, Capsicum pubescens or something like that. But a fun pepper to grow. Tomatillos, another nightshade, a little bit more of a weedy one. Rather, tomatoes actually are a heavy feeder, whereas the tomatillo is not so heavy of a feeder. And the other nightshades, this is oh gosh, I always confuse the name of this plant.
Cape gooseberry.
Yeah, Cape gooseberry is this is actually a sweet nightshade. It tastes like a fruit. So they call it Cape gooseberry. It's not a gooseberry at all. Gooseberry is the genus Ribes. This is a nightshade. So those are fun to grow. Basils. The picture that I have, of course, is the obscure sacred basil, which is an Indian basil, or Tulsi it's also called. There's several different versions of that. But there's many different types of basils. And basil is that warm season herb that I was talking about. Like it's a frost tender and perennial plant if you can keep it going, if you keep it from being frosted. Actually, everything we've talked about right now is naturally a perennial plant. So that's another big difference between the cool season crops and a lot of these warm season crops are tropical plants. In the tropics, they're perennial and they keep growing and growing and growing. We treat them as annuals because they freeze in the winter. But a lot of people have had that experience where that tomato just keeps going, and or the pepper that just keeps going. And so a lot of these plants want to be perennial. And sometimes they keep going. Like chiltepin is a pepper that, where is the peppers? Chiltepin is that tiny, tiny little pepper that's native here. If you go, just south of here in the Tumacacori Mountains, for example, you'll find them out there. That's a progenitor of a lot of our domestic peppers. But it's a perennial plant, and that actually is perennial in a lot of Tucson. There's many Mexican families who have had those plants grown in their backyard forever. Someone who's watching this right now has a nana who has chiltepins and has had them forever. So these are mostly perennial families. So we've been talking about the nightshades, right? And then we got mostly nightshades, and we talked about basil. Basil is not a nightshade, but the cucurbits is a whole group of crops that are highly unexplored in this country. We eat a few different cucurbits, but there's many. Like the picture, this snake gourd that's in the picture here. This is delicious, and there's Asian and Italian varieties and other European varieties, but mostly Italian. The Italians really know their food. The Italian food people we love Italians.
There you go.
Mwah. The Italians really love food, and so they've played around with a lot of these crops, and of course Asians have. But this is a gourd, actually. It's an edible gourd, the snake gourd. But there's many cucurbits. We're going to talk about summer squash and winter squash. Summer squash and winter squash are both warm season plants. So there are a lot of people who are getting new. They're new to gardening, and they think that winter squash is the one you grow in the winter, and summer squash is the one you grow in the summer. That's not how it is.
I thought that up until a few years ago.
Yeah, and sometimes it's because that thing about the frost where the plant keeps going. But anyway, the difference between a summer squash or zucchini and a winter squash is how they store. They call it winter squash because it stores throughout the winter, and that's how you ate food in the winter back in the day. And if you're like us now, winter squashes are the ones that have a harder shell and they store longer. And there are many things that we call pumpkins that are actually a winter squash. But winter squash is the squashes that store. The summer squashes are the ones that you eat, and they're soft, and you can eat them raw even, or Mexican cuisine, you slice them up and eat them for breakfast. But summer squashes were tender, and you eat them sooner. And there are some that are both. There are a lot of squashes like the Trobacino, which I might have a picture of later, that start off and you can eat them young and they're tender. The Trobacino is really great because it almost has that texture of like artichoke. And then you can let it develop into this big thing that you store in the wintertime. So there's that. By the way, it's 5:57. This class is going to last a little bit longer than an hour. So I know it doesn't matter because it's quarantine. What are you gonna do? What do you have to do? You don't have to go to work.
Some people do.
Some people do. But and if you do, thank you for putting yourself out there during this time. But anyway, the edible gourds. Let's move on. Bitter gourd or bitter melon is one of the most famous ones, and this is let's say that this is a food that requires what do they call that? Acquired taste. It's an acquired taste. It's bitter as all hell. Now I didn't have to acquire this taste myself because I don't know if I'm just a bitter guy. I love bitter food. I love bitter chocolate. I love bitter coffee. So of course bitter hoppy beer. I love big balmy wines that bust your face open when you drink them. I love to be punched in the face. So bitter melons will punch you in the face. They also will help you not get cancer. So there's that. But
and you can
you can make them so they're not so
as
bad.
Bitter.
Yeah,
but they're delicious.
They're delicious, and you can tone the bitter down. But it's a flavor that's we're not used to in the West, in Japan, China, Korea, and all throughout the Far East. Bitter melon is a major food, and it's delicious. So anyway, that's a cucurbit. It's another cucurbit. And, if you're starting to look at these plants, right, do you see the sort of commonality between them all? They're viney, and they produce these kind of, fruits. You start to see the patterns in families when you start to pay attention. Cucurbitaceae, they all kind of look similar.
Also, the bitter gourds have a really sweet little flower that smells like honey.
Oh, it's honey. It's more like
jasmine,
gardenia.
And then the leaves and foliage smell almost
funky,
peppery.
Yeah,
I think it's peppery.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
If you don't eat it, it's just a beautiful plant to grow.
Yeah.
But you should really try and eat it too because it's delicious and so good for you.
I wish I had a flower to show you. They almost look like, if you know the spider lilies, like those Sonoran spider lilies, they kind of look like a spider lily, but they smell like a gardenia.
And they're
beautiful.
Yellow. They're like butter colored.
Yeah. Some are white. Most are yellow. Yeah. Beautiful plants. By the way, this bitter melon is related to that first picture. Those snake gourds. They also have those nice smelling flowers. Cucumbers, cucurbitaceae. That's where the name comes from. And of course, I had to do a weirdo, but there's a white cucumber there. The cucumbers, everything we're talking about. There's so much variety in what you can grow compared to what you're used to. All the stuff that you saw in the grocery store throughout your whole life. There is those plants have been selected to sell because they last on the shelf. That's it. It's not because they're better. It's not because they're more tasty or more nutritious. It's just because they last on the shelf, and that's why they are important crops. But when you garden and you pull stuff out of your garden, you get to have, it's a luxury. It's such a luxury, and you will improve your life so much and have so much different experiences with flavor. So anyway, a side note, but the cucumbers are in the cucurbitaceae. Melons, and of course I picked a weird melon too, the banana melon. But melons, I mean, you think if you think you don't like melons, start playing around with how many melons there are to grow, and watermelon too. Watermelon is a different genus than than regular melons are, but these are all the cucurbits, and again, a bazillion varieties that you can grow. Ornamental gourds. So maybe you want to grow something and make it into a birdhouse, or just like I like having this kind of crap around my house, like pieces of nature inside the house. So ornamental gourds are very fun to grow. Most of the legumes are summer or warm season crops. We talked about favas and garbanzos. Those are the cool season crops. Most of them are hot season crops, and they're really easy to grow. They like crappy soil. They want the crappy soil because they're going to improve it. If you have a bed that hasn't been doing very well, let's say you really haven't been up on your compost game and you haven't really added a lot of nutrients to the soil, maybe one summer just plant a bunch of teparies, and it's not too late. You could do it now. We're actually going to do that ourselves. We have a bed where we're going to plant like probably mostly teparies, and let that see, legumes have a relationship with microorganisms in the soil that where they improve the availability of nitrogen in the soil, and it's a longer story that we go into in another class, but legumes are great plants because they really they're easy to grow, and they do take up room. They're very, very viney. So the teparies we've talked about, and the cowpeas, these are the two that I love the most because they're monsoon. You plant them in the monsoon and just let them grow until the frost hits them. Again, I have a weird tepary. There's so many varieties of teparies. This is actually a pretty rare one, but
it's pretty.
Yeah, it's real pretty. I don't even remember the name of it, but it's there's a lot of teparies out there. And teparies are like something you can barely find in the grocery store, but they're popular amongst gardeners. Then there's corn. And corn is a little bit more of it's the opposite of legumes. It likes a lot of food, but there's basically two types of corn, and there's actually it's like 5 types of corn, but basically two. As far as most of us here are concerned, there's the corn that you make into masa to make tamales and that sort of thing, and then there's the sweet corn that you just eat fresh. Actually, there's a few that are normally like a flour or flint type corn, but you can roast them when they're green. But that's another story. But the two types of corn, the types of corn that are like the flint or flour type corns, those need less time to mature. You can plant chapalote, which is one of our oldest. It's like the oldest variety that we've been growing here forever. You can plant that now and have some ears before the frost hits. Whereas sweet corn is a little more work. You got to plant it as early as you can and feed the heck out of it, and hopefully you get some corn smut too, or huitlacoche, which is the fungus that grows on top of the corn. Looks disgusting, but it's delicious, especially if you pick it right.
It's like truffles.
Yeah, if you like truffles, if you like mushrooms, and we do, you'd love that. Sorghum is a crop that you might just grow for fun. It actually has a use too, like sugarcane, which you can also grow. So sorghum and sugarcane are sweetener crops. You grow them for their sweetness, and most of us don't have the kind of tools to press to get the sweetness out of them, or you can do it by hand. It's a lot of work, but sometimes it's just fun to grow these things and have a relationship with the things you actually use every day. you use sugar every day, and you use sorghum probably every day, and you don't even know it. So, developing a relationship with some of these crops by growing them is sometimes a smart thing to do. And there are ways of, YouTube, hit YouTube and say, look up sorghum plus, develop or process at home. There's always somebody who's figured out some cool way of processing these things. Okra is in the Malvaceae, the mallow family or hibiscus family, but that is a fun summer crop, and it'll produce when nothing else is. In Yuma, the hottest place on the planet, not really, but pretty close. In the summertime, they're growing okra because okra loves heat. So really good summer crop, really easy to grow. You just have to pick the okra at the right time before it gets all woody. That pod that's there, you want to get that when it's tender. And then there's many ways of making okra. Some people, again, think they don't like okra, but maybe they haven't had it done very well.
Deep fried or
dehydrated. Yeah.
In soups.
It's not always mucilaginous. Sweet potatoes is a summer crop, and it's a tropical plant that grows like crazy. You can start them in the house. You can, if you have the little green sprigs that are coming off the plant.
Off the tuber.
Off the tuber. You can slice those off and root them in a jar of water. You could just plant the root too, but if you want to really get a good amount of tubers, slice that little green growth off and grow it in water for a few weeks until it grows roots. Put that out in the garden, and you'll have a really hefty crop of sweet potatoes.
Can't you eat the leaves on those?
Yeah, the leaves are edible. So, whereas potatoes, you don't eat the leaves. Don't eat potato leaves. That's bad. That's bad. But the sweet potato is an Ipomea, which is not necessarily usually an edible genus, but in this case it is. And in Asia, they use sweet potato leaves all the time. Burdock will keep growing throughout the summer and is more of a perennial crop. We mentioned it as a winter crop too, but it keeps going if you leave it. So that's why I kind of stuck this in there. Potatoes are a summer crop, and but they're actually kind of a perennial too, and that's a weird one with timing. Like it depends on the kind of potato you're growing. There's little fingerling ones that are really easy to grow, but these you kind of grow year round too. But if you keep them well watered and the soil rich, they're going to keep going all through the summer. The gingers is something that people don't know a lot about, but you can grow here. They're tropical plants. I suggest growing them either in a very well-prepared bed or in a very wide container. But when I say the gingers, I mean more than just ginger. There's turmeric,
just redheaded people.
Not just redheaded people.
Sorry.
That's why you're here.
Oh boy.
She's the best at those jokes. I'm terrible at them. I have no sense of humor. Turmeric is a ginger, by the way. And galangal. And there's many of them. There's actually many of them. If you start digging, and I'll post I wrote an article years ago that I should repost on Spadefoot about the gingers. But there's a lot of them out there, and they're edible. And it's not just the tubers. Sometimes the stems are edible. And so they're fairly easy to grow. Sunchokes, really easy to grow crop. A little bit harder to keep to process them because if you don't cook them right, they're gonna give you the toots. But
not just the toots, they're gonna hurt your gut.
You're gonna hurt your gut. Basically the trick is fermenting them, and we actually have a video that we've worked on, and I haven't finished yet, but on not only how to grow sunchokes, but how to process them. We ferment them, but there's also ways of cooking them. But man, talk about a crop that you can plant and get a whole bunch of food from, and it's easy. Sunchokes are actually a sunflower. They are a perennial sunflower. So they freeze back in the wintertime, and they're dormant, and then in the spring, they rise up again out of the ground and they spread, just like if you've ever grown Helianthus maximiliani, or the Maximilian sunflower is a perennial sunflower too. In fact, most sunflowers are perennial sunflowers, except for the common sunflower that we grow in gardens as an annual. But a lot of them are perennial plants. The sunchoke is really easy to grow, and it's very tasty. You just got to cook it right or pickle it right so you don't get the farts. But,
or if you want them, get them.
Or if you want
get it.
That little ache in the stomach and
bloatedness.
Yeah, that's onward.
Let's talk.
Horseradish is a summer tropical plant.
But it's perennial.
It's perennial. And it just keeps growing, but loves the heat. It just needs water, and it needs a lot of water. So horseradish is something you need to spend a lot of water on, but it's worth it if you love horseradish, and we do. It's so worth growing, and it produces a lot of food for the effort that you put into it. Amaranth. There's two ways of eating amaranth. You eat amaranth as a leaf, and you eat it as a seed. Collecting and growing amaranth seed is a bit of a lot of work. The one thing that's kind of hard to do in a small backyard garden are the grains, because it takes a lot of acreage to produce enough grain to be worth your effort. So when we grow amaranth in the garden, most of the time you're growing them for the leaves. And there are certain varieties that are better than others. You just got to go through the catalog and look for those. It's also about when you pick them. We have wild amaranth that comes up. It's called pigweed in Tucson. Very weedy crop that shows up in people's yards all the time, or in empty lots. If you pick them young, they're delicious. And you can use them as a raw green or a cooked green, but you got to get them at the right time. That's the picture of the green when it grows. Some people will grow this just because. I mean, look at that. It's beautiful. So I have been guilty of growing this plant just because it's pretty for the seeds, and not even eating the leaves. I think that's the last picture. Okay, so I got to move over to another thing over here. There we go. We're on the green that you can grow in the summertime. Malabar spinach is a weird crop. It's a vine, and it has these almost succulent-like leaves. And this one is all about cooking too. If you got to cook it just right. You don't want to overcook it because it gets kind of snotty, like mucilaginous. What we usually do is use coconut milk and do all the spicing and stuff and cook all the other stuff, and then the last thing you put in is Malabar spinach and just barely wilt it and eat it that way. But it's a delicious crop, and it's fun to grow because it's a vine.
And it's pretty.
And it's pretty. It's a pretty plant too. This is the red stem variety. There's a more green variety too. There's actually quite a few varieties of Malabar spinach. Vertillagus, or you might know it as portulaca, is as a summer crop, very summer crop. If there's even a rumor of frost, this guy just bows out like, later, dudes, I'm out of here. It does not like summer. This probably comes up in your yard already as a weed. And there is a similar looking plant called horse purslane, which has a rounder leaf. And it's kind of edible, but there's a difference between edible and palatable. Like horse purslane, there's a reason it's called horse purslane. It's better for the horses. The vertillagus, on the other hand, are delicious. And it's a very big thing in the history of Tucson. It's a very important food for us, especially for the Latinx community. But just something that you can eat fresh or cooked. Very easy to grow, very weedy. It might come up in your yard already, but there are varieties that you can buy seed of that are selected to be a little bit nicer than some of the wilder ones that'll just come up on their own. Popolo, sometimes called Bolivian cilantro. This is a South American plant that's actually related to a plant you might have come across if you're hiking. Have you ever gone hiking in the Tucson mountains, say, and there's this like almost grassy looking plant, and you brush by it, and it's got this odor that's like cilantro on crack. Um, that's Porophyllum, or called Odora, Porophyllum gracile. This plant, Popolo, is Porophyllum ruderale, so it's related, but it's got a wider leaf, and it's like cilantro on crack. So it's very very potent. Um, and there are ways of producing or using this that are probably better. If you're gonna dive into this, look for South American recipes because they've really uh, honed in the use of this plant. But it's a cool plant to grow, and it's actually more perennial if you can keep it happy. But big and bushy too. It can get really tall, so give it room. Shiso, an Italian herb. So this is another one of your warm season herbs. And actually, I kind of consider this a balmy season plant because it's something that really produces the best in the spring and fall and those balmy seasons. Although we have a couple plants in our garden that we planted late, and they look fine right now. This plant, once it goes to seed, will come up all the time every year. It's a nice plant.
We've had it perennialize.
Yeah, it perennializes. It's pretty too. The Korean shisos are my favorite. They don't have that raggedy edge that this one has. It has a rounder leaf. And gosh, they're pretty plants. But shisos, and it's got a flavor that you just gotta just grow it and taste it. You've had it, and you probably don't even know it if you've ever had sushi because they often include it in some of the pickles in sushi or in sushi itself. But fantastic herb to grow. Sunflowers. I really grow sunflowers for birds. I don't even care about collecting the seeds. I grow them because as a flower, they feed the pollinators, and then they produce seed that the seed-eating birds, like the goldfinches, have. And our neighbor's alarm is going off.
I'll close the door.
Yeah. Anyway, we grow this plant just because they're gorgeous, and they're good for the garden. And again, going back to that picture from our yard, this is what the warm season garden looks like. It's rangy and sprawly, and it's a pain in the ass to manage sometimes because everything just grows all over the place. What we've gone to doing is we have this framework now around our garden that's made out of this friend of ours grew a bunch of bamboo, and we got all this big giant timber bamboo. But you could do this with conduit if you wanted to. But we use these frames to tie up our tomatoes and tie up our squashes, or even to hang a piece of hardware cloth so that the vines can grow up them. That's something that we do in our garden now where we're going more vertical, and it's a better way to manage that warm season garden. The balmy seasons we're just going to briefly go through. The snap peas and the sweet peas are sort of an in-between season plant. They don't really love our summer, but they get frozen too. So you plant them in August and grow them, and then they produce until they get frozen. Or you can plant them, right after the frost, and then grow them until it gets hot. So that's sort of an in-between season thing. Nasturtiums are like that too. They will freeze with the frost, but a great crop to grow in between, either spring or fall, and they're delicious. And like we said, we made those. You can make pickled. You can pickle the green seed pods out of them if you want to. The flowers are edible. The whole plant's edible. Very spicy. Really nice little bit of spice to add to your salad. Oric is another one of those in between season things. It's related to saltbush actually, but and saltbush is edible too, if you cook it right and get it at the right time. But it's another crop that you can grow. Agretti is there's agretti and there's okahijiki. So these plants are related, and you know what they're related to? Tumbleweed. If you take a close look at them, have you ever seen tumbleweed coming out of the ground? That's exactly what those are, except a different species. Actually, I think they've altered the genus on that right now. Stupid botanist. But anyway, they're very closely related. And believe it or not, the tumbleweed, if you pick it when it's really tiny, is delicious, and you can eat them raw or cooked. Agretti and okajiki and tumbleweed are full of nutrients and really good for you. And they also have a really good flavor too. So these are those in-between season things that you kind of like grow in that balmy season. Now I put artichoke in here because it's just a weirdo. It's technically a biennial, although they can perennialize, and because they sucker like an agave does, and so like the new one will come up. The new one that comes up and grows into that giant plant will be the sucker of the old plant. But the artichoke eat the flower bud usually, and we have a cat that's meowing in the background.
Sorry.
So actually pretty easy to grow here. We've grown a lot of artichokes, but the other thing that I think people should grow more is cardoon. That first garden that we had in the community garden, we grew cardoon, and it grew so well, and it's really pretty. It's a giant plant, and even you let artichokes and cardoons are basically the same thing, except that the cardoon has that thick leaf base. So you see that thick leaf base? It almost looks like celery. That's actually what you eat on a cardoon. You can also eat its flower bud like you do on the artichoke, but that's not why you really grow it. You grow it because you want that stem, and that stem you follow the recipes. There's a lot of recipes out there because you can cook this and make it terrible and it doesn't taste that good. But if you do it right, cardoon is like eating an artichoke heart. It's like a big celery stalk of artichoke heart. Super delicious, super easy to grow, and also that flower bud, if you let it go to flower, it's one of the most gorgeous flowers that you will ever see, and the pollinators love it. It's a fantastic plant.
It's a thistle.
It's a thistle. It's a giant thistle. It takes up a lot of room in the garden. You do sacrifice a lot of space when you grow these plants. So
but that's why cardoon is better, because you can eat more of it.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Did you... Sorry,
Question.
someone's asking about celeriac plants.
Celeriac and celery, and parsley root, which parsley root is confused with celeriac. They're not the same. And there's a parsley root. It's going to get really confusing. But they're
cool season.
They're all cool season, and they were asking about. I'm sorry about
when and how to plant.
No, but they asked about celeriac. So celeriac, you've seen them probably in the grocery store. It looks like a big knotted root, and it's a root vegetable that tastes a lot like celery, but a little bit more. Got a little bit more starch in there, so it's a little bit more satisfying. It's a fun plant to grow. If you're going to grow that plant, you're really trying to give it enough time to develop that big fat tuber. So plant it as soon as you can from seed, direct seed into the ground, and what you do is you plant a row of them somewhere, or a circle, whatever you want to do. Let them germinate and thin them out and give them all enough room to develop into those big tubers. Remember how big those tubers get. You've seen them in the grocery store. So
would you start them now?
August.
Okay.
Start them in August, and then grow them throughout the cool season. We didn't talk about celery, but celery is very easy to grow, especially the Asian varieties that are thinner. They're very easy to grow and so much flavor.
And they have a pink one, which is very fun.
Yep. The Asian pink one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a pink one that's Asian. There's also pink regular celery too, the European celery or whatever. But So yeah, those are all cool season crops. Celery is really easy to grow, and you can grow different successions of it. It's much quicker. Celeriac takes some time, so plant it in August, or September is fine too. You're not too late even in August, but you just give it enough time. I mean, sorry, you're not even that late in October, but plant it as soon as you can in the fall, and then give it enough time to develop the tuber, and give it enough space. Don't overfeed it with nitrogen, and that's something we're going to go into. This class is longer than I thought it was going to be. That's always the case. Borage, another nice herb, balmy season herb. It sort of comes up. Once you plant borage once, you'll probably have it come up all the time. It's starting to come up from seed right now with the monsoon rains. And it really never kind of went away. I mean, in June it kind of went away, but there's always seedlings coming up. It's kind of weedy. Luckily, it doesn't escape outside of cultivation, or else I would tell you not to grow it. You eat the flowers on this. You can eat the leaves too. They kind of taste cucumbery, but the flowers are why you really grow it. Makes your salad gorgeous as well as delicious.
People candy them.
And you can candy them. Sugarcoat them and candy them. Epazote is a very, very regional crop for us. You grow it in the balmy seasons. I mean, this is another one that may stick around in the summer depending on how hot it is or how happy it is. It reseeds itself like a weed too. This plant is what you throw into your beans if you don't want your beans to give you a musical time. So it brings the gas down on your legumes. So hint there. If you want to just buy it and not grow it, go to Food City. They sell it. So that was just a few of the balmy crops, and then we have perennial crops, and those are going to be like thyme and oregano and these herbs that we grow. Rosemary, it's a permanent spot. They take up a lot of space. Some of them you have to kind of control a little bit. Oregano and French tarragon and mint where's the mint? Oh, well, whatever. They take up a lot of room, and you should grow them in a container maybe. Oregano you can kind of control, in the ground. Rosemary takes up a god-awful amount of space, so treat it like a shrub. If you need a shrub in your yard, grow rosemary or nice ground cover, because there's the upright growing rosemary, and then there's the trailing rosemary. But even the trailing rosemary can grow really tall. Yeah, buddy, it's all about you. Yeah. French tarragon is a perennial too. It's active in the summertime. Get the French tarragon. If you see something called Russian tarragon, it's tarragon that's grown from seed, and you can't grow this from seed. You have to get the cutting or a cutting grown plant. French tarragon is very specific. It doesn't produce seed, so you have to get it from someone who's grown it asexually. But that's the one that's the tarragon that they use in French cooking, like with chicken. It takes up a bit of room. Mexican tarragon is unrelated to French tarragon. It's actually a marigold, and slightly different flavor, but delicious. And it's a little bit more tropical, but perennial. We grow it, and we sell it at the nursery too. It's almost native. It's a Tagetes. So that's like the mountain marigold or true marigolds. They're tarragon. They're Tagetes. Flowers edible and the leaves. Curry plant really becomes a big tree if it's tropical. In our climate, it's going to be more like a shrub, and you're going to protect it from frost, and you use the leaves. Curry plant is the real curry. The curry that you buy in grocery stores is something that they don't even really use in India that much. Like they're like, curry? Well, that's this leaf. It's not this mix of herbs. But it's delicious. Curry has so much umami. It's so good. You take the leaves and you throw them in hot oil to infuse that flavor into the oil. Easy to grow plant. Not always hard. Not always easy to get a hold of a plant. We're working on it for Spadefoot, but we at some point we'll have curry plants available. Capers, we have sold capers in the past. They actually really love our hot climate. They're hard to get a hold of, but we had some last year and we will have some this year. This is a giant shrub that grows very big, and you eat the whole plant's actually edible. This is the flower of the caper, gorgeous. The flower bud before it flowers is actually what you turn into those pickled capers. So you pick these and pickle them. But you can also pickle the fruit, and that's what the fruit looks like after that flower gets fertilized. It develops this almost like mini-looking watermelon thing, and that's pickled. And you can actually buy these, like Roma imports. We saw it recently.
Yeah.
Actually, we have some in our.
We have some.
We have some in our refrigerator. And another thing that when we started growing capers, we have a friend Suzanne, who lives in Phoenix. She's the one that actually grows a lot of our herbs and veggies. And she's one of those lovely Italians who loves food, and she got us our first caper plants. And the thing that I didn't know about them is that you can pickle the leaves, and they're delicious. So the whole plant's edible. It does take up some room, and it goes dormant in the wintertime. It's hardy down to about 18 degrees, but and loves this climate, loves the heat, just wants really good drainage. Mexican oregano, not an oregano. It's actually closer related to like lantana, which if you look at that plant, kind of looks like a lantana, right? Mexican oregano is the oregano that you buy at Food City. If you go to Food City and you buy the Mexican oregano, that's the plant, Lipia graveolens. And there's other Mexican oreganos out there, by the way, and there are other native plants actually that have a very oregano-like flavor. But this plant from Mexico is the true Mexican oregano, easy to grow, frost tender, but easy to protect from the frost. Takes up some space. Asparagus. This is something, there's some foods that people grow because they love food. And there's some foods you just eat because you love food. Going back to the artichoke, anyone who buys an artichoke and goes to the trouble of steaming it and goes to the trouble of eating it, you're like pulling it apart and you're dipping it in butter and eating it. You love food. If you do that, you love food. So asparagus is a plant that if you love food, you're going to love asparagus. It's got its own flavor. And if you're going to grow it, it's not something that you're going to be feeding your family with, okay? It takes up a lot of room. Most of the year, it's inedible. The time that it's edible is when it's coming out of dormancy. And what you're seeing in this picture right here are the primordial branches that are coming out, and they're going to bust out with leaves and then turn into this big ferny plant. But you harvest it before that, and it's delicious and tender. This is what it turns into. Have you ever seen that old-fashioned plant, asparagus fern that people grow? It's related. They're actually in the genus asparagus, as is this. They're not as edible, but this one is. But see, if you're going to grow asparagus, you're going to need to reserve a big space for them because they take up a lot of room.
And it takes at least a year till you can yield any crop.
Yeah, at least.
It starts small.
yeah. In a year, you might be able to pull out a couple of spears in the spring. And I even suggest to wait longer. But it depends on how you get it. If you get like a starter that's maybe got a head start, you can also buy what they call crowns, which is a dormant crown, just like if you buy a bulb and you plant it in the ground in the fall. And if you buy it that way, it's going to take more time, and then even more time if you grow it from seeds. So, but if you love food and you want to know more about it, or you're just a freaking nerd like we are, you might go through the trouble. So, moringa is something that's become very popular. It's actually a tree where the whole plant's edible, but really for most of us, we're just going to eat the leaves. They call it horseradish tree sometimes because of the flavor. And I'm gonna be honest. I've been growing moringa since the 90s, but I got into moringa, the genus, not because it was edible, but because I grew weird plants. And moringas are caudiciform plants. If you keep growing them, they get big fat trunks and they're really cool looking. But somewhere along during the 90s, there's this big buzz about it's the tree that's going to save the world because it grows in dry climates and it's very nutritious, has a very wide variety of nutrients available, and it'll help solve poverty in a lot of areas. And people grow them, when they grow them to eat them, like for the foliage, they're going to treat them like a shrub almost. You're going to cut them back. They will freeze here most of the time. There used to be some trees on campus, U of A campus is very frost free in a lot of areas, and they had some large trees. I think since then, development has had its way with a lot of those cool plants on campus. But anyway, this has been very popular. A lot of places have been selling it. Easy to grow. It takes up space. Mint, there it is. Grow it in a container. It'll take over the whole garden bed. But really nice plant to grow. Easy to grow. One of the reasons I like mint so much is because they're flowers, and it's not for me. I don't give a crap about mint for me. I grow it because
sometimes
we do use it. Yeah, we use it sometimes, and mint's really easy to use. You just throw it in your water in the summer, and it's nice. But actually, one of my favorite things about it is when it goes to flower, it's a really good nectar plant, and it'll be full of plant to grow for that reason. If you can get your hands on this Vietnamese cilantro, it's a perennial plant. It's tropical. I would describe this flavor as spicy in cilantro. It's like got that cilantro-like flavor, but it's got a bite to it. Really nice plant. Very tropical, sporadically available in the trade. We're not going to go through too much of this, but we can grow a lot of fruit trees in our climate because we live in a relatively mild climate. When I say mild, we don't get a lot of cold. So citrus are very important here, and there's just a lot of trees that we can grow. Goji berry is a shrub that grows really well here. It's actually a wolfberry. It's in the genus Lycium, that is the same as the Lycium wolfberry that grows naturally out in the desert here. The fruits are bigger on the goji berry, and it's been prized as a superfood. And we have some at the nursery right now for sale, actually. And they've been
loaded with fruit.
Yeah, loaded with fruit. They kind of go dormant in the summertime in June, and then like right now they've been growing back and leafing out, and then they just became covered in fruits. So
and the fresh fruit tastes like a bell pepper.
Yeah, but
then
sweet.
if you like a nice one of those mini bell peppers, and then if you dry it out, it gets that sweeter attribute to it.
Yeah. So shrubs, trees, and vines. That's what I put here. There's a tree that's actually an uzu, which we grow at our house. Uzu is a citrus that people make preserves out of in Korea, and also many products in Japan are made out of it too. You've had uzu probably because it's in a lot of Japanese food, especially like a lot of their stir fries and stuff. Goji berry is a shrub, and then of course vines. This is a grapevine, but there are a lot of fruit trees. That's a whole other class. It's something that's going to take up a lot of space in your yard and develop and time to develop, and it's a little more work. It's a whole other subject. Loquat's a very important ethnic plant for here because the Spanish brought them here, and so did the Asians. And so the Asians built our railroads, and then they settled here afterward. And so some of those old loquat trees you see around town are often at old grocery stores because the Asians were very much into opening grocery stores in Tucson. And they're on some of the old Asian farms too. You'll see old loquats. This is just a cool plant we have in our yard. The Buddha's hand. It's a citrus. But anyway, it's another subject. We're going to go into preparing the soil, and I'm sorry for y'all if you had other plans. This class is going on longer than we thought, but this is the first time we've done this live stream, so bear with us.
Couple questions before you move on.
Yes.
Somebody asked, what is the water used for capers?
Capers are fairly low water use plants. compared to most of the things that we're talking about in this class. In fact, we have to watch out not to overwater them. They don't want to sit in water. They want very good drainage. A lot of people will grow them in a raised bed that actually dries out quicker. We have to be very careful with them in containers when we grow them at the nursery. So yeah, lower water use plant. But still a little more water than native plants. It's not a native, but it is from a dry climate, and it does grow in places where, it grows out of like in the Mediterranean. It grows out of like rock. It'll be like a lot of those plants that we have here. They grow out of almost no soil, just out of a rock crevice, and this giant plant will be spilling out of like a crack in the rock. That's their natural habitat. So yeah.
Also growing lavender.
Lavender is a fussy plant. It's Mediterranean, but it's part of that Mediterranean that has a dry summer, but not as hot as here. It's a cooler summer. They don't like moisture in the summertime. They're perennial, but they will get super cranky. We have one right now, and I just actually kind of whacked it back because it was looking kind of rough. There's some new growth coming up underneath. People assume, I think he wants out.
He's in.
Okay. So they get brown, and that's not anything wrong with the plant. So when people say that lavender's hard to grow, it's not so much that it's hard to grow, it's that it has a season. And this is something that you should think about with a lot of perennial plants. All perennial plants have seasons. Some of them get crankier in their off season than other plants do. And people always assume something's wrong. Don't assume something's wrong with the plant because it has brown leaves. That is normal. What do you look like when you wake up in the morning? Do you look fresh and revived? I don't. I did not wake up like this. Lavender's like that. So it has an off season where it's not looking that great, and then later in the monsoon season, more towards the fall, when it starts to cool off, it starts to like really kind of bounce back. And so don't give up on your lavender if it's looking cranky in the summertime. It likes the really good drainage, much like the caper does. It is a plant that does grow in weedy plots in the Mediterranean, rocky soil. So, wants really good drainage. Most people kill it with too much care, or they give up on it when it looks cranky. So, lavender in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Preparing the soil. So when you're preparing the soil for a garden, you're going with the lowest common denominator. Like, you're growing a lot of different types of plants, and they all have their different needs. But when you first prepare the soil, you really want to bring in the nutrition and the biology. Now, there is a class that we do later that's on plant nutrition, composting, and it's going to dive a lot deeper into this. But we will brush on this because it's important, and a lot of people want to know how to do it. What I'm going to tell you is what a beginner should know. First, it's all about digging and seeing what you got. This is our yard. So you saw what we did. This is what we were working with. That is not great looking soil. It was, maybe not a lot of caliche. Caliche is that almost concrete-like substance. It's calcium carbonate. It's basically eons of rain, shallow rain, and salt depositing and creating this rocky layer. Sometimes it's just rocky substrate that's, the geology of your land that you're digging up when you hit the caliche. But anyway, it's calcium carbonate. It's chalk. It's hard. It's rock. It's concrete. So you will have that sometimes. We were lucky enough we didn't have that, but the soil wasn't great. What I do, I dig down pretty deep, and I replace my garden beds when I'm growing in the ground. I replace them with part of the soil and a whole lot of compost. And every season we try to add a lot more compost back to the system. It's something that you have to always kind of do. What you're really doing is mimicking nature. And in nature, there's debris falling on the ground. There's over eons of time. You're growing a lot more plants per square inch than would naturally occur in nature. So you have to kind of up your game with bringing organic material into the ground. That's why you add compost. And um, and so we dig down and we well, okay, before I even add the compost, uh, you grade. And what we do here, see, here's when we first started here. We dug our beds and we waited for that first rain to tell us where the water was going. And where you want the water to go from the rain is into where the plants are growing. You want them away from the house, have that water sloping towards where all the plants are. Not only because it's nice to save water and take advantage of the rain, but the garden loves rainwater so much more than regular water because it is different. It hasn't been, there hasn't been a bunch of additives added. It's not salty like our water, and our city water is terrible for plants. And so rainwater, you want to take advantage of it. So make sure that your ground is graded such that when the rain comes, it goes towards the garden bed. They call that planting the water. Look up Brad Lancaster if you haven't already. It's a must learn thing. Local permaculture. Brad Lancaster is a local permaculture guy, and he's written a couple of books. We sell the books on rainwater harvesting. This is called passive rainwater harvesting. We're not using tanks. We just drive the water where the plants are. So that's important. But here you are. Here's a profile of the soil that we dug down in this yard, and you can tell it's like not that great looking. But surprisingly, this is soil without water. Once you add water and organic material, magic happens. There is a lot in that soil. It doesn't look like it, but there's dormant organisms. There are nutrients that are locked up. It's all in there. You just need to bring in the conditions that unlock those nutrients and unlock those sleeping microorganisms. And so, so here we are with the compost added, and again, like we try not to walk into our garden beds too. So like where Katie is in that picture, she's in the right place. We have these little thin strips in between our beds where we work from. We try not to step on the garden because you want oxygen too. So when you dig up the soil, you're not only just digging up your bed, you're fluffing up the profile of the soil, and you're adding that organic material. When you're doing that, you're adding microbes, nutrients, and oxygen. Those are the things that are going to make your garden very happy, and water. And so so there it is with the compost added. And compost is another subject, but we do compost at our own place here. And, we got chickens and we have a lot of debris from pruning our plants. And now we have a nursery here too. So we're always trimming plants. And every time you have something that you trimmed, you can put it in the compost. And all of our food scraps go there too. So it's a good way to keep waste out of the landfills, which is an important thing to try to do. This is me and my child scooping up compost that we made. This was actually just a few weeks ago. This picture was taken. So this was added into one of the new beds that we have. But compost is important. It's something that you're going to be constantly doing if you have the space. If not, buy commercial compost. It's fine. Try to buy it without the bags if you can, because single-use plastic is stupid. But even if you have to buy them in the bags, you need compost. But I'll tell you this: even if you do a crappy job of composting, that compost will be better than any commercial compost. And there's a lot of reasons for that. More on that in another class. But this is the secret to being a good gardener: is if you have the space, do some composting. Again, you can get them in a bag, and try to buy it local for a lot of reasons. Local, you should always support local businesses. We sell it bulk at our nursery, so you can bring your own container like this person did, and we sell it by the cubic foot. I think it's $7 a cubic foot, which is really cheap. most bags of compost cost at least $10, so sometimes 15 or 20. So anyway, that's compost. Some people get a truck delivery, so you might do that. Okay, so you get your compost in, and this is actually, this picture, let me see where we're at here. Yeah, so this picture is actually, I think I've already planted seed, and I add a little bit of straw as a mulch. As the seeds germinate in the garden, or as I plant starters, because we still use starters sometimes. Sometimes we don't have the time to start from seed, or we're busy, we didn't get around to it. You buy starters. Pluck them in the ground, but once those things start growing a little bit, you can just lay thick layers of mulch in between the plants. You don't want a bunch of it up against the plant, but you want to have like something to stop the sun from beating down on the ground, and that'll save you a lot of water. It'll make the garden a lot happier. It's good for the plants. And then of course your method of watering. I like these drip tubes. They call it drip tape. It's long tubes with these holes that let out water, much like a drip irrigation does. And so that's what we use in the garden. This is what it looks like before we plant it out. Actually, there's seeds germinating there, so this is actually after germination. And then what I would do there is just add the mulch. But you can see here we've started from seed in this picture, and the next step in this scenario is to thin or not. Sometimes people will just grow a mess of greens all right next to each other, and then you just harvest them like that. What you give up is the ability for each of those plants to develop into a full head. So I said this earlier in the class, but if you want a full head of lettuce or a full head of chard or a really nice, well-developed head, give it the space it needs to grow. And you do that by thinning. And when you thin, what do you get? You get microgreens, right? So you don't throw that away. Like, eat it for your salad. You go out in the morning, you can pick enough microgreens for your salad in the morning. We eat salads in the morning in the cool season. It's just how we do it because it's seasonal. But anyway, when you start from seed, the other rule is that you plant a seed as deep as it is large. That's the general rule. If it's a tiny seed, are you taking my wine?
Just taking this.
Okay. If you plant a seed, you want to plant it as deep as it is large or as wide, and keep it very moist. And the seeds will start to germinate. In this scenario, in this picture, I'm actually watering with a hose. I have the irrigation set out, but the irrigation is not going to be as useful until those roots start to spread out. So I do use a overhead watering with a hose.
But a hose with a water wand on it.
Yeah. Which
straight from the hose is going to disturb the soil too much.
Correct. Yeah, right. So you can use a sprinkler. You can use a sprinkler if you want, or a water wand that widens and softens the spray so that you're not washing out all of your hard work.
More of a shower setting.
Yeah, like a shower. And so we keep the soil fairly moist. The seeds germinate. We start to thin. Eventually, we don't need overhead water, and the irrigation takes over the job. This is how we do it. You don't have to do it exactly like this. You can water by hand the whole time if you want. What you are committed to when you water by hand is you have to be there to do that. If you go on vacation, I'm going to tell you this now. Your neighbor who's really cool, like nice hippie dude, he's like, I'll totally water, man. It'd be cool. And you're going to go away, and he's going to forget. One day he's going to get too drunk on his patio and pass out and forget to water, and then something's going to die. It happens so much. So if you're watering by hand, just know, trust robots more than people when it comes to time. Here it is, starting to add the mulch after the seeds germinate. We've talked about that. We use straw. There's other things you can use. You can use wood chip mulch if you want. I kind of like straw because it breaks down. It can be a little weedy because the seeds from the grass come up that made each type of straw, but it's easy to pull them out. It's not really a big deal, but it does very quickly decompose into the ground and feeds all those, um, you know, organisms in the soil that turn organic material into food for the plants. So it's an important thing to have. And the more brown a substance is that you add to your soil, the more that it feeds the fungal element of your soil, which is important. You don't want too much wood in your soil, but a little bit's fine. And having this is a early pepper plant from a garden from a long time ago, but here's a pepper coming up in like February or maybe even January, and it's got the mulch around it. And if the frost is going to come, I'm probably going to cover this. And and then you might have some other elements to help. Like if you have vining things in this picture, you can see that we had prepared the bed to accommodate vining things, but also you also notice that this plant's already shading its own roots. I mean, this garden's already shading its own roots. So in the beginning is when that mulch is really important for some seasons. But the squash is very good for shading its own roots. So you want to feed, if you can, especially certain plants. The most important nutrient really is phosphorus, especially for the summer garden. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they're all fruiting things. They need phosphorus. So phosphorus, the middle number, so you see the three numbers there, 444. The first number is nitrogen. That's important, very important nutrient. Second number is phosphorus, and the third number is potassium. So those three numbers are just a way of knowing what's in that fertilizer. And when I say fertilizer, I really kind of hate the word fertilizer. I like to say soil food. I don't like to think about feeding plants. I like to think about feeding the microbes in the soil that make the plants happy. So you should always want low numbers on your fertilizer. And again, we're going to go into more depth on this in our plant nutrition class, a composting plant nutrition class. But the thing to know is organic foods are almost always low numbers because they break down in the soil first and then they go to the plant. Synthetic fertilizers are mined or they're synthesized and they're heavy duty. They are high, heavy salt substances that blast the soil, kill the microbes in the soil. Most microbes don't like heavy salts and they're killed by them. Organic foods don't kill microbes. Now, synthetic foods do feed plants and they get that burst. People love that too. They love to see they fed the plant. It grew right away. It's very satisfying, but it's a lie. It's kind of like drinking coffee all the time. You get that like buzz, and believe me, I love coffee, but you get that buzz and then you're going to crash. It's not very healthy to live on. That's kind of what we do in agriculture. We blast a plant, and we don't think about the microbes in the soil, don't care about it. We just kind of we're only thinking about the plants because we're human. We don't think about the whole ecology. I want you to think like an ecologist when you garden. I want you to think about you're raising a miniature ecosystem. And so when you feed organically, it's not even important really like the numbers on the fertilizers. At least if there's some. I like this picture because it's a 444. It's like got a little nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Potassium is usually pretty easy to get in our soils, but nitrogen and phosphorus get used up. So you do need to add that back into the soil. You do that with compost, but a little boost is nice, and this is a little boost without killing your microbes. So anyway, you don't have to like kill yourself over figuring out which one should I get, because like honestly, like in capitalism, they just want you to buy stuff all the time, right? So every company comes up with their like citrus food, azalea food, palm food, and yeah, there are some things that are important about all those, but not about all of them, about some of them. But really, they're just trying to get you to buy more crap. You don't need more crap. What you need is to just get the basics in there and take care of the plant, and get that balance of water and organic material and some food in there so that you have a little ecosystem growing. That's how most vegetables grow. Vegetables and herbs are really easy to grow. There are other plants that are a little bit more demanding. Palms have a little bit more of a need for magnesium, for example, although palms are pretty easy to grow. But if you have a problem with your palm, it's usually a lack of magnesium. Azaleas, don't try to grow azaleas here. They belong in climates where they have acidic soil. We have very alkaline soil. But azalea food has an acidic element that makes them easier to grow. But just don't grow azaleas. Anyway, I hope that answered your question about fertilizer. We basically use kelp meal and fish emulsion, and sometimes something like this. Every once in a while, we'll put in some bone meal or something. But it's the compost that's actually more important than the fertilizer or the plant food. And so, why did I put this slide in there? Yeah, so like, in this picture, you can see that you won't always have, if you have like room for a couple of beds, we have we have 4 beds now. We leave one fallow. So that second picture, the second bed in this picture, you can see there's like cardboard on that bed. Underneath there, we composted directly into the bed. That's kind of a nice thing to do. You're giving it a break. This is a cool season garden, so we composted in there, and then in the spring you could plant, or I would wait till the summer. In the summer you could plant legumes and grow legumes in there and add the nitrogen in addition to what you composted. So sometimes you'll play around with those beds. Learning when to harvest is, it's a big subject, but it's something that you just have to sort of, you can always ask us, you can always read books and look at blogs. One thing, look at information that is pertinent to Arizona. Our seasons are totally different here. Our information for gardening is totally different here than it is anywhere else. So just like, you can text us, you can message us if you have questions, and look up local information. Don't look at a YouTube video and like, well, there's people, they did this thing in the spring. But it's from Massachusetts, and like their climate's totally different. Their needs are different. I have a picture of garlic in here because garlic, you wait till the tops die back, and you pull them up, and then you let them sit out and dry out. They call it curing in the sun, and I do it kind of like dappled sun. I don't do it in full sun because our sun's pretty intense, and that cures the garlic, and then you can store it, bring it in. And learning when to harvest is all about just like playing around and listening to seasoned gardeners, but also learning from yourself too. You'll learn certain things like, let's say daikon radish. You'll grow a daikon radish, and you want to get it really big, and it's so impressive looking, this giant daikon radish, and then you go to eat it, and it's kind of woody and fibrous in the middle. So like for your root vegetables, you want to pick them when they're bigger, but they're not giant. They're tender still, and they're delicious, and they have more flavor when they're tender than they do when they're giant. That goes for a lot of root crops, and a lot of crops in general. A lot of leafy crops even are more tender when they're little and more full of nutrients than they are when they're big and impressive looking. People do love to grow things to an impressive size, and there are things that are better when they're bigger, but not everything. So that's something you just have to play around with. You can always ask, but when you're learning when to harvest, you also got to think about what you're gonna do with them. Sometimes you get all your crops at once. You're gonna have like 40 bitter melons. Like, you can't eat that much stir-fried bitter melon at once. So, like, there's no way. So that's what drives you into pickling and stuff. So make a plan. Be aware. Like, oh, I have this squash coming. I'm gonna have a lot of squash. What do I do with it? Zucchini squash, let's say. Well, you can slice it up and dehydrate it. And again, a dried vegetable like squash is an ingredient in Mexico that's very important that we never use in the U.S., but it's very good. read cookbooks. Continue to expand on the varieties of things that you grow and experiment. This picture here is komatsuna, and there's a whole host of these mild mustard greens from China that I was growing a long time ago because I thought it was fun and interesting, but they all kind of taste similar. And so you wonder, like, why do they grow all these different varieties? And I was growing this for a while, and then I realized I read this recipe in what's her name? Fuchsia Dunlop. The Land of Fish and Rice was the name of the book, and there's a recipe for Megan Sai. I said that Megan Sai. So Megan Sai, you take that green and you snap it in half and hang it on a little line and wilt it, not dry it, just wilt it. And then you stuff them in a jar with some salt, just like if you've ever made sauerkraut, kind of like you make sauerkraut. A little bit of salt, and cram them down in a jar and ferment them. And you ferment them you can ferment them for quite a few weeks. Then you dry them again into hard. They turn into something that looks like this. Now these have been nicely wrapped. This is not our Megan Sai. Our Megan Sai is a little bit more rough looking. We have some that we made 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's still good.
Yeah, we just pulled it out and it's still delicious.
It's still delicious. It tastes like we made it yesterday. And what's even more impressive is that mild mustard green, which just tastes like a green, turned into something that tastes like soy sauce. So people add this into soups for the same reason you would add soy sauce. It's like this umami, salty, delicious thing. So kind of incredible how you get this flavor out of something with a little bit of fermentation and drying. Like, how did they figure that out? I don't know, but like that's what we do now. So that's all from learning, playing around and reading cookbooks and growing things you might not have grown before. Plant placement's really important, particularly for the summer garden, because you don't want to shade things out. You generally want to grow things so that the tall stuff is towards the north end of the garden and the shorter stuff is towards the south end of the garden. Why is that? Because the sun is, even in the summertime, the sun's a little bit to the south. So if you have something just to the north of a big leafy plant, it's going to shade it out. So you want to kind of plan around that. But then there's exceptions to that, like the Three Sisters garden, which is a mixture of corn, beans, and squash. And this is something that we got from the various indigenous tribes of the Americas who always grew it this way. The beans providing the nitrogen in the soil, the corn providing something for the beans to vine up, and the squash shading the roots to protect the roots from the sun. They work out and they work together in a very good way. So Three Sisters Garden is a great way to grow some summer crops. Here it is again, short to tall, north to south. It's it's really important when the plants are right next to each other. Also, just learning how to space things and give things room to grow, which we've already talked about. Ample space, there it is. That's frisée, which is one of the most delicious greens. It's like one of our favorites.
Pain in the ass to clean, but so worth it.
And easy to grow.
Yeah.
Root crops don't want a lot of nitrogen. So they like the crappy soil. So if you have like a bed that's kind of worn out, that's where you can grow your root crops, and they will develop nice. You still add some compost when you plant them, and don't deprive them of nutrients by any means, but you don't want a lot of nitrogen. So if you have a fertilizer that has a bit of a first number, the 3 numbers, that first number, if it's a little high, stay away from that for the root crops. They don't want a lot of nitrogen. They'll look great. They'll grow leafy and beautiful, but they won't have much root development. But they really kind of like cruddy soil. Legumes are something you would obviously not plant next to a root crop because they increase the nitrogen availability in the soil, or they don't, but their relationship with the microbes do. So legumes, put them next to something that doesn't mind a little bit of extra nitrogen, like corn or squash even. Even though those are both fruiting plants, they grow so fast that they have a high need for nitrogen. And for the same reasons, Alliums, it's a root crop. Don't plant it next to legumes. And they don't really need a lot. They need a little more nutrition than, say, a radish does, but still not a heck of a lot. Let your herbs flower. We talked about this before. Not only because you can use them, but it's going to pull in a lot of those insects that pollinate plants. And but not just insects that pollinate plants. They're going to bring in insects that are beneficial because as larvae they eat aphids and they eat some of the pests that cause problems. The squash, we're very happy if you let your herbs flower because you're just pulling in all those pollinators. You're pulling in all those bees. So fruiting crops, a lot of our vegetables and fruits, you only need to really plant one. But if you have a fruiting crop, it is better to have more than one, even for the ones that are self-pollinating. I have a picture of the tomatillo in here because they really fruit a lot better if you have another plant in there. They can still produce fruit if there's only one, but not very many. If you have a bunch of them, they're going to produce a lot more fruit. So this here is to illustrate when you let those herbs flower and you have a lot of flowering plants in your, plant some milkweeds in your garden. Actually, this is a picture of a milkweed. And on there, you can see the little black and orange specks are aphids. But see those little silky threads, those little white silky threads with the little things on the tips? Those are eggs of green lacewing. And they hatch and climb up that little thread, and they just start eating. In fact, the reason they're on that little silky thread is because they'll eat each other. So they'll eat their own eggs of their brothers and sisters. So that they've evolved to have these threads so that when they get on the leaf, they'll just start eating those aphids rather than eating their brothers and sisters. So a lot of these pollinators that are really sweet, a green lacewing looks like a drunk Tinkerbell. It's like this. It looks like a fairy, and it's like it has like a sloppy flight pattern, and it's a really sweet insect. But it's a killer as a larva, and the same as ladybugs and hoverflies, which you would probably mistake for a native bee. It's actually a fly, but it's a pollinator. Most fly species, by the way, are not the annoying ones. Most fly species are pollinators, and they look like bees or bee mimics, especially here. As larvae, they eat things. So that's why we don't really that's why we tell you to be organic, but that's also why we're not really into the insecticidal soaps. Like, people are going after the aphids. They get really freaked out about aphids. Aphids won't kill your plant, and they will come under control after a while. So, once those green lacewings hatch and they start eating those aphids, the population of the aphids goes down. But if you go and you spray them, you're going to kill the aphids, the green lacewings, even if it's this organic insecticidal soap.
Even if it's hose, water from the hose.
Right.
If you're spraying them off, you're spraying everything off.
You're spraying everything off. And guess who comes back faster? The aphids. Aphids reproduce with such speed. And then you got rid of the green lacewings and the hoverflies and the ladybug larvae and the monarchs if you have, milkweeds or whatever. Guess who comes back fast? The aphids do. But you know what? You slowed down the predators. So you end up creating more of a problem. Leave it alone. That is, I don't know if you've seen our video. It's called Chill Out. We have this project called Chill Out. Just chill out. Leave it alone. Things in nature even out if you just leave them alone. Provide the plants with what they need, but don't fight nature. If you see this in your tomato plant, don't kill this. This is, do I have a picture of the, no, I don't have a picture, but this is a beautiful moth. It's a sphinx moth. And they'll eat some of the plant. The plants always come back. The plants have evolved with these insects to grow back. because it doesn't make sense for these insects who evolved with their food plant to wipe out their food plant. It doesn't make sense. Um, the plants have evolved to come back from these feedings, and sometimes they look better than when like let's say in the summertime and you got this cruddy looking tomato plant, and then you have this guy come in and do a really nice job of like cleaning it up. He just like eats it back real hard. That plant will grow back and probably fruit better than if you had just left it alone. If you had gone after it and killed the caterpillar. Plus, look at that. It's cool. Leave it in the garden. It's really cool.
Plus, if he's not eating it, you don't want to eat it.
Yep. And that's the problem with modern form of gardening. If you make it such that insects don't like the plants, you're also harming yourself. I have this picture in here because people love to freak out about grubworms. A long time ago, these pesticide companies needed to repackage this terrible pesticide that they had. And so they realized people really hate grubworms. They're creepy. They freak people out. So they're like, oh, the grubworms kill your plants, so you got to put this on your soil. It's really toxic, so toxic, really bad for the soil, really bad for microbes, definitely bad for your plants, definitely bad for you. Guess what? That grubworm does the same job as an earthworm. In fact, it's native. So guess what? These guys don't kill your plants. It's really hard to get this through people's heads because people have been just trained to think that grubs kill plants. They don't. The majority of the diet of most of our grubworms is detritus. It's rotting material like leaves and stuff like that. That's what they eat. And they do nibble on a root here and there, but no more damage than the normal like loss you have on the top of the plant, where like an insect might eat some leaves back, or you might have stomped in the wrong place and snipped the plant back. It just grows back and branches out more.
Yeah, it causes more growth in the roots. It's like the same as when the caterpillar eats your plant down. It makes it shrubbier and bushier, and it grows back better.
Yeah. So our garden is full of grubworms. If you dig them up, there's grubworms in there. Our plants don't die from it. And ecologists know this. Gardeners don't, because they've been trained by the pesticide companies to believe that grubs are bad, but they're not. And you want some proof for this. If you have a compost pile, go dig in your compost pile. There's no roots in there. Go dig in your compost pile right now. And what are you going to find in there? There's so many grubworms in a compost pile. What are they eating? Are they eating roots? There's no roots in your compost pile. They're eating detritus. That's what grubworms eat. And these turn into beautiful scarab beetles, really cool looking rhino beetles, and just so many cool beetles.
Palo Verde beetles, just...
Her dad's raising a grubworm right now in the kitchen.
Ernest Grubs.
He's called Ernest Grubs. And they're trying to figure out like what it is. Is it a rhino?
He thinks it might be a Hercules beetle. Escaped a couple times.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So anyway, grubs are cool. Learn to love grubs, and they are edible if you're adventurous. I ate one once.
Maybe cook it. It's probably better.
Yeah, I just ate it. It was a dare. I'm stupid. But yeah. So earthworms do the same work as. Grubs do the same work as earthworms do. They eat detritus, they aerate the soil, they improve the microbes in the soil, and they're native. Earthworms are not native. Earthworms are introduced, and they're okay. They're here. They're just part of our urban landscape in Tucson, and they're not even just urban anymore. They're here, but and they're not causing. I don't think they're displacing anything, but they're not native. Grubworms are native, and they do the job that earthworms do in other climates. So just stop fighting nature. This is a bunch of vegetables, and I don't know why I put that slide in there. I think it's just to talk about our daily life, where every day we go out there and there's something always to eat. There's something always to pull out of our garden. And my favorite thing is this, our morning salads, which are gorgeous and 10 times more nutritious than anything you would ever buy in a restaurant or get from the grocery store, because you just picked it so it's at its peak of nutrient content. The flavors, you get to play with the flavors. There's flowers blooming, and you get to learn all your edible flowers like calendula and pansies, or half the vegetables that you grow when they bolt have edible flowers. Our lives are so improved by having these things, and we get to play around. This is native yarrow. Yarrow grows up in the mountains here. I made beer out of it, and so when I say I made beer out of it, yarrow is a natural bittering agent that they used before hops. So, and the purpose of bittering agents in beer is to preserve the beer, plus add flavor, but also it's a preservative. And so I knew this about yarrow, and I made an experimental batch of beer with my friend John Reed. This is years ago. And we used hops a little bit too, but we used yarrow, and the flavor of this beer was so good. Like everyone I gave it to, whether you're an IPA person or even my friends who they only drink like
sour beers,
or what's the
Lamb.
Blue Moon? Yeah, I have a friend who only likes Blue Moon, and they liked this beer because it was interesting and it wasn't too much punch you in the face, but it was fun. So I got to play around with that. This is marmalade that we made out of muckrat. So muckrat is the fruit of a plant that most people know as kaffir lime, and I'm only going to say that once because the word kaffir is the N word in South Africa, and we don't know that in the U.S. So we use that word all the time, but don't use it. Call it muckrat, M-U-K-R-A-T, muckrat, and that's the Asian name for that fruit, or the leaves. The leaves are what people usually use in tom kha gai. But anyway, the fruits are not something that people usually use. But what we did is we made marmalade out of it, and you can do that with any citrus. So again, it's just like playing around with ingredients. You get to grow things that no one else has grown before, like this is a cucumber, believe it or not. In fact, it's actually what cucumbers looked like before we bred them, so that they have that glossy green skin. This is called Seacom cucumber, and what a fun crop to grow. And it tastes like a cucumber. It has a slightly different flavor. It's delicious, but really fun to grow. We also do things like we've made a lot of relationships with people with our garden. This is a truckload of spent grain and from Borderlands, and we use that to feed our chickens, but also to feed our compost and garden beds. In fact, the compost we were using for a long time was a little bit alkaline, and we didn't know that at first because we were using so much of this spent grain, which is very acidic. So spent grain's really acidic and nice, and it's very good for our very alkaline soils. So this is, was more than we could possibly use at one time, but we gave some away and then we composted the rest of it. And we're always on weird trips. This is when we were collecting that bamboo that we used to build around our garden bed. Somebody had some bamboo, so we're often seen hauling weird stuff. So our gardens caused a lot of adventures for us, but mostly it's improved our quality of life because the food is delicious. It's made us into foodies. It's made us more educated because we're always researching. So that's what I want to leave you with. And so that's the end of the slideshow. There's a couple of questions. Someone asked when to plant calendula. Calendula is a flower that's grown as an ornamental, but the petals are edible and very nutritious. It's one of the few non-native flowers that I will plant in my garden. And you plant it in the fall. It's a cool season crop. Once you plant it once and you let it go to seed, you'll probably have it every year. And we have it popping up in our garden every year. But, we pull the petals out for our salad. So that was that question.
I think.
So, yeah, we went, it's 7:25. we're still here to answer any questions if you want. And if not, if I've tired you all out, that's fine. There's a little delay here, so we're going to wait a minute to see if you guys have any questions. Katie's tired. I just wanted to make sure that we offered, that time for you to ask any questions you have. It doesn't have to be related to vegetables and herbs. It could be related to anything.
And you can also email us, text us.
Yeah.
Message, Instagram, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah. We do all that. We're pretty responsive. Sometimes on our day off, we will not respond for a little while, or we're out camping and offline, but we will answer you, whether it's Facebook or email or text. Is that?
I think we got all the questions so far.
Okay. Yeah. So, if you have any questions, type them into the YouTube stream or text the phone number on the bottom there if you have any questions. I actually haven't been checking my phone. Here we go. There are some questions here. So,
wait, one, we didn't make the wine that we're drinking. We have, well, not personally, but it's just from...
It's not cheap wine, but it's not local wine. We do like to buy local wine.
Yeah.
That's the wine we're drinking tonight. It's a Cab Sauv, Someone asked, can you cover what you do with tomatoes that are not fruiting? Oh, so if your tomatoes not fruiting, there's more wine.
Give me your glass.
There's a couple of reasons why tomatoes stop fruiting in the summer. Sometimes in the summertime, the heat just prevents the flowers from really developing into fruits. And that's normal because tomatoes are not usually abused the way that we abuse them in our desert. And so the way to get around that is keeping them well fed, like full of nutrition. And when I say well fed, like think about the micronutrients too. So like if you get a balanced fertilizer, that's good. But think about micronutrients too. And we use azomite, but you might use any of the other micronutrient fertilizers that are out there. They are always mined, but they're not in the kind of quantities that kill microbes. So they're okay to use. They're micronutrients. So they're usually shallow mined. It's not the deep mines that ruin everything. But what it usually is old seabed and or old swampy areas or whatever, and they're full of there's just a lot of micronutrients in there. But that helps. I've noticed mulching totally helps. Even when the plants get bigger, that layer of mulch above the root system keeps the heat off those roots, and the plants will usually fruit better. The smaller tomatoes tend to produce better in the heat than the bigger tomatoes. Although in that one picture where we had that summer garden that was full of tomatoes that year, that we had the big ones too. They were fantastic. So it's also about picking varieties that are tested for our region. So that's what we sell at our nursery. The Suzanne, who grows our vegetables, well, technically tomatoes are fruit, but most people say vegetable. But all those tomatoes that we grow and sell are selected by a lady who, they're varieties that this woman in Phoenix has tried out. And if it can grow in Phoenix, they can grow here because it's a lot hotter there. So there are some varieties that just don't do that great here, especially in the summertime. So there's that as well. But good nutrition, even watering, very consistent, even watering, not like forgetting a couple of days and then flooding it. And then, try to keep your watering schedule consistent. That all helps with keeping the fruiting going. Were there other questions? Did you check the text?
I'm checking text. I think we're good.
Okay.
Huh. Drank more wine.
You drank more. Someone said they drank more wine than I did. That's because I'm talking. So.
And if I drank more wine, then it wouldn't have been fair.
That's so nice of you.
I try.
As we go on too, we're going to start posting a lot more articles about this kind of stuff. How we use our crops here at our house. We do a lot of experimenting with how to preserve our harvest, and a lot of this is all about preserving your harvest. So that's a big important part of vegetable and herb gardening and fruit tree gardening. So I hope you all got something out of this, and you can continue to email or message us questions, and then just let us know what you thought about the class. And thanks for listening to us
and drinking wine with us.
Thanks for drinking wine with us. Yeah, it's hard to drink with your friends when it's quarantine, right? You can't really see them, so this is a nice way to do it. Are we done?
I think so.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Well.
And Ethel, what do you have to tell everybody? Anything? Anything from Ethel? No? Are you shy? Are you really shy?
All right.
We out of here.